Information fueled,
opinion driven. This is Nashville's Morning News with Dan Mandis.
And so, my fellow Americans,
we talk news.
8:06, Nashville's Morning News on Super Talk 99.7 WTN, along with Joan Jones, Johnny B, Dan Mandis here indeed. EJ Haust is joining us. EJ, always great to have you on the radio program. Of course, folks probably know by now you, at one time in your life, spent many years as a Minnesota-based journalist and spent a lot of time covering one Tim Walz. And so I've been dying all morning, EJ, to know what your impression was of Tim Walz, because you and I have gone back and forth on text because you've been frustrated because the media has just been all in on this aw shucks kind of Tim Walz, I'm just a normal guy, when in reality the Tim Walz that you know is far different.
Very different. In fact, most everybody on any kind of talk radio in Minnesota or any kind of conservative outlets on X and other social media, anybody who lived under Walz or currently lives in Minnesota is saying, who is this guy? Because this kind of folksy dad in plaid cheerleader type with his hands waving and everything else is not the Tim Walz that we saw, certainly when he was running for governor both times, but really just his entire political career. So this is kind of a 180. It's like a completely different person, which is strange to watch, but it is interesting because I do think last night in the debate that crumbled a little bit. You could see him finally getting, J.D. Vance was able to get under his skin a little bit, and he was a little uncomfortable finally. And that kind of angry, like wide-eyed, like, wait, I want to say something came out. So it was nice to see that finally. I think some people were probably shocked to see that he's got these kind of angry emotions.
I want to play a piece of audio, and I think it's something that J.D. Vance did really well in attacking Tim Walz. And it has to do with freedom of speech.
But you guys attack us for not believing in democracy. The most sacred right under the United States democracy is the First Amendment. You yourself have said there's no First Amendment right to misinformation. Kamala Harris wants to use the power of government and big tech to silence people from speaking their minds. That is a threat to democracy that will long outlive this present political moment. I would like Democrats and Republicans to both reject censorship. Let's persuade one another. Let's argue about ideas, and then let's come together afterwards.
You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. That's the test. That's the Supreme Court test.
Tim, fire in a crowded theater. You guys wanted to kick people off of Facebook for saying that toddlers shouldn't wear masks.
Senator, the governor does have the floor.
Fire in a crowded theater. That is criticizing the policies of the government, which is the right of every American.
I love how Walz says you can't yell fire in a crowded theater. EJ Haust, he knows damn right well what J.D. Vance is talking about.
For sure. And actually you could kind of hear it under J.D. Vance speaking. What he said is not for misinformation and hate speech. Mm-hmm. It was quiet and you couldn't hear it from behind, but I hope that somebody will enhance that audio and really make that a big deal within the Trump campaign, because Walz he's the governor who tried to shut down speech during COVID. He pushed for a thing called the bias registry. There were floor debates about it in the Minnesota legislature. He really pushed for that. That J.D. Vance was being absolutely right about the censorship part of it.
Well, can you tell me a little bit about what the bias registry was?
Yeah, so it was basically trying to fight misinformation. It would be putting people on a list if you were sharing things that were opposed to the government narrative. It was very just rudimentally. You mean
EJ like all those people that turned out to be right?
Right, everyone who ended up being right in the end would be on that list. Yeah.
So I guess part of this, because you've been watching Tim Walz for years, the Tim Walz that you saw on the debate stage, have you seen him in previous debates? You must have. He must have had, governor's debates and so forth, and for Congress and so forth. So has he ever been this bad, or is this pretty much par for the course from a debate standpoint?
Well, I think it's important to note that the Minnesota media has been so in the tank for him from day one that they really didn't give him anything difficult, right? Like every debate seems to be the same way. I mean, it's, hey, Republican person, everything you do stinks. Everything you say stinks. Please explain to us why you stink. And then they go to the Democrat and they say, hey, here's your opportunity to say something great that you could use in fundraising emails. Give us a soundbite, please. Right? Like that's a typical debate format, and it doesn't matter if it's national or otherwise. And Minnesota was no different. I mean, they really, truly love their access to the governor. They are just in the tank for it all. So you're not going to see previous debates where Tim Walz was really pushed. I mean, I think that the hardest question he got, he totally flubbed on, right? Was his, hey, were you in China or not during the Tiananmen massacre? And if they had asked more questions like that, like, hey, explain the stolen valor thing, explain this other lie that you told, right? Because there are plenty. Tell us about the $250 million fraud scandal where a bunch of, nonprofits that weren't really nonprofits sucked the money out of the American taxpayer and you let it happen under your watch. They don't ask him tough questions like that, right? So the debates are very, just predictable.
The stage. They're basically the debates are about as real in Minnesota. They're about as real as professional wrestling.
Right. Exactly right. That's a great way to put it. It just isn't something that we would have seen. But off the cuff, though, when he does get asked questions by media or really more by citizen journalists, he comes out with these phrases that you just wouldn't even imagine. I mean, he does get very angry. That's
really? Because EJ, we didn't see that at all last night.
I've become friends with school shooters.
Didn't see that at all last night.
I'll give him that misspeak. I mean, I think he was trying to make a larger point, but boy, that's unfortunate.
Yeah, and here's the part of this dovetails right into what you're saying, which is after the debate, Tim Walz goes out for pizza and he refuses to clarify any of his comments.
Governor, you said you've become friends with school shooters during the debate. Can you clarify what you meant on that?
Can you clarify what you meant when you said you'd be friends with school shooters?
Why can't he just go and do what you just did, EJ? Which is, okay, so I misspoke. That was an obvious misspeak. And
you know what's interesting about him misspeaking, though, Dan? And I think this is a big thing, right? Because he says, oh, I'm just a knucklehead who misspoke. I grew up in Nebraska, and that lets me be a knucklehead, right? That's his excuse for it. Why would we want that man who can't quite get it together, who misspeaks so often on really big, important topics? Why do we want him one inch away from the presidency? Which one of those men last night would you trust to take over if something happened to the president? I think that's pretty clear.
So he also, of course, EJ, you and I both know that Tim Walz, going over the VP debate, Tim Walz went into this wounded. Couple of things going on. Number one is clearly the wind is in the sails of J.D. Vance and Donald Trump. Number two, J.D. Vance is incredibly eloquent, and he's a great speaker. He's a great defender of MAGA values. And Tim Walz was clearly overmatched, but he was also going in knowing that he was going to be asked about the lie regarding him being in Hong Kong during the Tiananmen Square uprising.
You said you were in Hong Kong during the deadly Tiananmen Square protests in the spring of 1989. But Minnesota Public Radio and other media outlets are reporting that you actually didn't travel to Asia until August of that year. Can you explain that discrepancy?
Well, and to the folks out there who didn't get at the top of this.
And EJ, he goes on for like 2.5 minutes. And he's just, you just said, I'm a knucklehead from Nebraska. What do I know, right? Well, here's the thing. As you just appropriately said, number one is if he can't handle, what dates did I go to Hong Kong, well, then how is he going to be able to take on Vladimir Putin or, Kim Jong-un?
That's a great point. That's a great point. got to remember, too, I mean, every time I come on the show and we talk about him, I'm trying to sound the alarm. He's an exaggerator. It's not even so much that he, flat lies, which, of course, he does, stolen valor and being in combat and all the rest. But he's an exaggerator. He does it dangerously because it's to advance his own political stance, his own, he wants the pats on the back, whether it be from the media or other politicians, or Alex Soros, Little Soros, as I'm calling him now. He exaggerates so much that he can't be taken seriously, even when he has something to say that maybe we ought to listen to. So that, to me, is a dangerous position to be in, particularly for a vice presidential candidate.
E.J. Haust is joining us, spent many years in Minnesota covering Tim Walz. I want to play a piece of audio for you, and I thought this was interesting. Maybe you know about this, maybe you don't, but there was a story a couple of days ago about the amount of immigrants that, or illegal aliens, whatever you want to say, that ended up being brought into Minnesota. This is what Tim Walz said.
We have more refugees per capita than any other state. That's not just morally a good thing. It's our economic and cultural future. This beautiful diversity we see out in Worthington when I'm there, you see 50 languages spoken in the school.
Yeah, so just a little bit of research on that. Worthington is a train wreck as far as the schools go.
Yes, it is. Really across Minnesota, since he's become governor, all of the reading and math scores have tanked, and they just keep throwing more money at it. But it really is a problem. Imagine being a small town, and all of a sudden you have thousands of immigrants speaking multiple languages. What does that do to your school system? It's not just that they speak multiple languages. They don't speak English. So it's not like they're speaking English and another language, and yay, we have this diversity where maybe our American students can learn from them. It's not like that at all. It's overwhelming our systems. It is overwhelming our school systems, our healthcare systems. Literally every public offering is overwhelmed in these communities where they're bringing in, immigrants. And whether it's legal or illegal, really, at this point, doesn't matter. J.D. Vance made a good point last night. He was talking about Haitian immigrants, and he had to fact check. And I love that he did that, and he pushed back on the moderators who just really wanted to make a point and make the show about them. But what the part that was missing from all of that, is that these Haitian immigrants in Springfield, for example, are on TPS. That's a temporary protective status. What's temporary about it? When do they leave? How come we can't get anybody to ask, when are they going to leave? Because if it's a short temporary thing, maybe they don't need to be in our schools, right? Maybe they don't need to be, given so much government assistance. If it's temporary, take care of them, send them back, done. It changes the dynamic of everything. Well,
and here's the other thing, and I did mention this earlier. You probably know about this, but I think you were gone by this point from Minnesota. But in Worthington, New York Times did a big old expose on Worthington specifically in February of 2023, where they talk about all of these kids that are working in these like meat packing processing plants or whatever. And they're being exposed to chemicals. They're working with blood and feces and urine, and they're breaking child labor laws.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's not uncommon, believe it or not, in many immigrant communities. I did a bit of research on that years ago and found very similar results. So I'm not surprised by that. And it's actually quite sad. The culture just doesn't fit with American culture, where we do have labor laws. We do take our children as being sacred. We want to take care of them. We want to educate them and raise them well and make them into good, independent, great people. Right? Like that's our goal as parents and as a community. And sometimes that doesn't align with some of the immigrants that are coming from other countries that have a very different view of what the purpose of having children is.
All right, so I've got a minute left. We got 35 days before November 5th. What happens next? Next 35 days.
I think we get sound bites from last night for sure. I think Walz may have won the soundbite debate, believe it or not, because of the does Trump accept the election results question, right? They're gonna, even though it was perfectly reasonable, they're gonna blow it up and make it sound like it was something it wasn't. So I think they'll run on that. They'll have some good social media and some ads. In the end, though, I don't think it matters. It doesn't really move the needle. Trump has the momentum right now, and I think it's all about registrations. So Trump is winning on the new voter registration, and to me, that's a good sign.
AJ Haust, how can folks find you on Twitter?
Oh, please go to X and find me at EJ Under the Radar.